I use that website a lot to print off. You can print air photos of your property off of that website.
Does that replace WG Extreme?
It's the same thing. Yeah.
You know how often the air photos are updated?
The latest one on there is 2022, I believe. No, 2020. They're getting updated next year, so they do it every 4 years, so I'm guessing it's 2020. They did one in, I like the 2018 a lot. It shows you the tornado damage of 2017 and things like that. So it had all those air photos in here. You click on, so you can click on all these different things up here that brings up stuff, and then you click over here. This might be, and I didn't show you all the details and how to work this system, but you can play around on it. If you get confused, you have my number, give me a call. I help landowners all the time work their way through the system if they want to find information. Let me click the next slide. So this is an example of when you get to air photos. This is a 2018 air photo, I believe. No, 2020. This is the Arlen Rifle Range. The county owns this. You can see the chute here, so you can kind of see this. This part was destroyed by the tornado. I'm planting it this spring. When you click on this, see it's highlighted in red. You can click on this and it brings up this information up here. And it has all the information, the parcel label, the owner's name, Barron County, the acres. But then the other thing also you can do is you can click on report. And let me see if I can put that up there, report. Make sure I highlight. So yeah, different air photos you can do with it. You can find out who your neighbors are. And just a second. So that is really awesome. You can even see the history of your property. It has the topo maps on there. Yeah, you want to click the next slide. Just a second. I didn't memorize what I have on each slide, so I apologize.
Does the topo maps actually give you elevations?
They actually, I haven't played with, yeah, the topo maps do, yeah.
It will give you, alright,
I believe so, yes. So you click on the report and this is what comes up. So it actually, so someone was asking me the value of your taxes of your property. And I've helped many people find out that their taxes are incorrect. Even my neighbor down the road, they were being taxed as productive forest land, which is the highest tax. In actuality, 3/4 of that land was actually in agriculture. It was corn. But the tax assessor, and they never knew that, because when you get your tax bill, it never says that. But in this program, you can find out what your land is taxed at and what things. And, so this one, this is Wisconsin County Forest Crop, so it's in the County Forest Program. So this would be where it would say what you are assessed at when you click on this report to find out what you're taxed at. So that helps. Another option in here, and then here's the parcel history. You can click on these and sometimes it brings up something, or they'll say you have to pay for it. And I don't know how that process works because I don't pay for it. I just go up to the deeds office. Here's the legal description, like I was telling you. So if you don't know how to read the legal description, it kind of gives you this information right here to how to figure that out. They can also, and I didn't bring this up, you don't need to turn, I did not, show a slide of this, but you can go to the full external report. And it goes into the more details of that property, and you can look up the previous owners. All the way to 2000, I think 2000, or might go later, earlier than that. You can look up, what deeds or different information is on that property. You can look up the tax bill, like how much they pay in actual taxes. I can actually, if you are curious of how much let's say you have it in productive forest land, how much is your taxes? I can help you figure that out. You can call me up on that. Because I get a lot of questions. My taxes are high. How do I get them down? One option is the managed forest law. Has anybody heard of the managed forest law? That is a way to bring your taxes down a lot. Another option to maybe check on, if you have agricultural land more than 40, I think it's more than 50% in a legal 40, your forest land should not be taxed at productive forest land. It should be taxed at ag forest. So those are some of the things to look at. It can get very complicated. It's best for me to look at it because I notice these assessors really don't get out of their cars very much, or they don't look at it. And sometimes I find mistakes in favor of landowners and say, yeah, don't tell anybody, I didn't hear about it, let's just buy it. And you keep your taxes low as long as possible. I've seen that happen a lot too. So those are options to figure out who your neighbors are, boundaries, and your taxes. That's a lot of information. I'm hoping you at least caught a little bit of that. If you have any questions, you can give me a call at some point. We could look at your taxes and we could look down and figure out if you're taxed correctly. I've done that with many landowners if it's necessary. Any questions on that?
I've got it. When you're talking about finding out who your neighbor is, if it's in an LLC, how do you track that down?
So when you click on that square, it will bring up the owner's name and the address.
But if it's an LLC,
It will give you the address of where you can send it. Or you click on this full external report, and you should be able to see where their tax bills are being sent to.
So
I've done that where I need to access county forest, and I could not get a hold of, because it's landlocked, and I couldn't get a hold of the neighbor to get to it. I had to click in here, find their name, and wrote a letter. And it took a while. He finally wrote me a letter back and said, yes, you can access through
so
my
if it's a
property.
corporation, then it'll go to the address of the corporation.
Yeah, whatever address they have for the mailing address. So that's a way to get to know your neighbors if you don't know how to phone call them. And start that way. Yeah. So when should you get surveyed? There are rules in the townships. We have encroachment, other issues like that. This explains it. There could be many different reasons to get it surveyed, or just to ease of mind, or if you're passing it on to your kids. A lot of landowners do that. So there's multiple reasons. Where to find a surveyor? You might be able to find a licensed one through this website, but I talked to the local surveyor here in the county, and he says not everybody's on that list. But the best way to do it is a word of mouth. Ask around. Does anybody know of a surveyor? I do not. Phone book, internet, find somebody in the area.
I found you have to contract them about 6 months ahead of time. Because they're very busy, and if you have woodlands, they only want to do it either in the early spring or late fall after the leaves are down or before they've come out, because satellites need to have direct access to satellites.
Yep. Yeah,
So
very
it takes
good
a
point.
long time to get them set up, and that's what I found.
Right, they have specialized equipment that needs to get through the woods, and they can get it really right on. But that's what brings the price up a bit. So that cutting line agreement, other ways of doing it, maintain the fence. Is another way to make sure this was the property you always thought it was, maintain the fence. You can, if you go back a couple slides. I even done this on my property, I looked it up. And these lines are pretty accurate, actually. I'm pretty amazed. And even I live in Polk County, and our property, we have encroached on the neighbors. We are aware of it. He's aware of it. We're gonna plant some trees, and then we're gonna move our trail. We actually moved our trail south. So it's not, but it could be easily, adverse possession, because we've been using the trail for many years. And if he sold the property and we kept using it as an option, so it's really good to get to know your property boundaries. And this line is, you can use this air photo to approximate where you are, to give you an idea.
Are the fence lines the same as they were 100 years ago? You're right, and his right?
As far as fencing.
Oh, we'll get onto that subject. That's a good point, but yes, I'm gonna talk about fencing.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, fine. I mentioned something about adverse possession. One handout, number C. I have information and adverse possession, information, so if you're interested in more of this, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not gonna go into major detail, but I want you to be aware of it. There are some rules, it still happens. You can't adverse, one thing to know, you can't adverse possess government land anymore. They changed that law. But it doesn't mean it doesn't still happen. The county forest did lose some land this year or last year. So they went to court and they figured it wasn't worth it to fight too much, so they compromised. But you can, and then I've heard in other counties, in Polk County, I had a landowner. This guy has been farming this land for years. Then the guy next door decided to get it surveyed. His went into like 20 feet into his farm field, destroyed his access to the farm field. They went to court. I was for sure thinking the farmer would win. Unfortunately, the farmer lost, and he lost it all. Lost that whole section, even though he's been farming it for years. Now, how does that make any sense? I don't know. So that's why I don't want to go into much details about it, but knowing your property boundaries, know where the fences are, keeping them maintained can help you along the long ways. And my recommendation, if you have any issues, get a lawyer. My best advice though, is get along with your neighbor. Once you start the lawyer process, then there's other issues down the road. Can everybody hear me? I'm trying to talk loud. Okay. All right, we can go to the next slide. Yeah, what I've been saying all along, maintain your fence. So I'm gonna touch on some of this stuff like the fence law, the recreation and use law, and the trespass law. Click the next slide. Trespass law. If you have trespass issues, a lot of people call me, how do I get a hold of the warden? The warden doesn't deal with any of the trespass laws. It is through the local sheriff's department that you need to contact. I do get a lot of phone calls with dogs and dog hunters. Unfortunately, the dog hunters say, well, the dogs don't know where the property lines are. It is a hard situation. I'd suggest trail cameras, get the sheriff involved and get documentation. I don't have best advice for that. It's unfortunate that it happens, and like I said, if you can get along with your neighbor, maybe if they're really into coyote hunting, saying, okay, yes, you can coyote, but I deer hunt and I recreate here. Call me every time you're coming out there. If there's an issue, I'll let you know. You know, there are a lot of coyotes out there, so maybe you could work with them and we'll create some peace between each group out there. I think that is the best way of doing it. But it is a rule that the recreational user that's hiking, let's say there's an open managed forest law land that you can hunt, and they're out there hiking and they end up on somebody else's property, it's their fault. They should know where the property lines are. There's no ignorance of the law. So something to be aware of for trespassing. You can go to the next slide.
There's no law that requires properties the corners be identified or?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is no, way back when, you used to have to put no trespassing signs up all over the place to designate your property. You do not have to do that on your property anymore. It's automatically assumed that that recreational user should know where that property line is. Now, if you border up to public property, you do need to put a sign up so that people, at least that's what I was told at one point, that you have to have a sign of some sort just to make people aware not to come onto your property. Unfortunately, that doesn't help all the time.
Just on the corners, or how frequently do they have to play?
I don't know, I honestly don't know that one. That's a good question. I don't know.
I don't think there's guidelines, and I think how far you can see is, if it's really dead forest, it need more time. If it's more open, it's either far, you need less.
Right. It's not,
It's the onus on the owner, not the
Right,
recreationalist.
when it borders up
Which is
to
different
public
than what
land.
this said.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just for if it's next to the county public land,
Yes.
yeah,
Right,
but we're not, so
Mhm.
we don't have to post anything.
Right, but only the people that are public land.
I've got
Yeah.
some signs on public land.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think it's best to let people in the public land know as much as possible. And, you know, if you have issues with your landowners or a new owner, it's nice to establish those signs, say private property. Make it a nice sign, private property, and then your neighbor might say, hey, I don't think that's actually the line, and then discuss it, you know, instead of saying no trespassing. We kind of did that when we bought our property and it created some issues, but we got to know them and then they understood us. Recreational use statute. What this is saying is, like if somebody comes onto your property, even trespasses, you are not liable if they get hurt. The only, or let's say you have there's land out there that you can open to public property so people can hunt it and hike it, the open managed forest law. They are not liable if somebody gets hurt on their property. The only way that you would be liable is if you were malice, like you dug a hole with some twigs above it and you purposely did that and it was a trap for somebody to fall into. That is kind of a purpose. Or if someone pays you to come onto your property, and I think there's a specific amount, $2,000, that's another way to be liable. And then if you invite people on there for specific use and they get hurt doing that use, then you could be liable.
So if you leased hunting rights to someone and they became injured for more than $2,000 and they became injured in the course of that hunt, they could sue you.
They could, yes.
But I believe, what's the term,
You could put,
if they sign a paper that they.
yeah, if you sign a contract or a lease saying a hunting lease, and you have it in there, I am not liable for any
It's a liability
damages.
release,
Yep,
but those don't hold up in court.
They don't?
No. No.
okay,
But you
I,
can-
in my experience, liability releases are only good if the person actually buys that it's a true release. But
okay.
when it's gone to court, they typically don't hold up.
But you could require that they have insurance to cover themselves.
Well, they do, like they said, it's because of this, and because even you're not liable for those other reasons, let's say someone's on your property, open MFL and they're hiking, you're not supposedly liability, people can sue for any reason. And that happens quite often, so it's good to have this liability insurance anyways. And you can always get to recover the costs of the court case too, so keep that in mind too, because you should not, most people, I would say 90%, if you follow under those rules, that they're just out there hunting and hiking because you're in the open MFL program, or, oh, there's another program out there that opens it up for public hunting, you are not.
So. A couple of years ago, I allowed the snowmobile trail to run through my property. Should I be concerned about liability?
That would be something you need to talk to the snowmobile shop. I believe they have a piece of paper that, or a lawyer that created, I think, because that's a trail system, they have something written not to keep. But I don't know for sure. I'm guessing there is, because that would be a big question.
And that wouldn't open you up for adverse possession either. if
No,
they
no.
Use it for
No,
4 years. Okay.
right, right.
All right.
If it's written on paper, and I think I'll bring up adverse possession coming up. I don't remember where I talk about that, or did I? Maybe
You
I
talked
did talk about that already,
yeah.
so, yeah, adverse possession, something to be aware of too is that, yeah, if you have a document, if you're bordering and they're like using your property, well, yeah, you can still use it, put it in writing. Say they're using your property, they can't acquire it then.
Okay.
So it's nice to get things in paper.
Now it says number 3, you invite. But what if somebody asks you, can I come hunt on your land? Okay,
That's still an invitation. It's still, you're allowing them to come out there.
So that would open, if you allow somebody to hunt, that's opening you up to liability then?
were you talking on land? It's not managed
Yeah.
forest, just land.
I'm guessing so,
Because that.
but I think you also fall under the fact that the recreational use statute, which is the berry picking law, that you could still claim that you're not liable. I don't think you are.
I don't think you should be.
No,
What you should.
but you know, that's why I wanted, I'm bringing this stuff up. And those are big, good questions, and we could maybe look that up and ask a lawyer if we're writing, are we writing this down? Maybe that's a good question to look that up. For sure. From what I've been told over the years, they made that law that you're not liable for a lot of things, and I think for specifically individual occasion, this might be a loophole that you need to watch out for. But I think it wouldn't hold up in court very well. Because they chose to come out there, unless they can prove that it was malice, that you hid, that there's a hidden hole or another issue out there. I can't see how this would hold up in court. But then again, it would be good to have that insurance. Unfortunately. The insurance does.
So the landowner would have the insurance.
Right.
And some landowners do that, they don't have a waiver. They have a waiver form that the visitor will sign. Now, is that rock solid legal document? No. But it's a way to kind of cover your butt in case, you know, they might be friendly, they come on the property, they get injured doing something they invited them on to do. And they still get hurt, and they're still like, I'm gonna sue you for whatever reason. Liability is at least something you can do.
Right. And it does say that a social guest, is somebody personally invited for the activity in which they are injured. So they have to be personally invited. So if they asked to hunt, that would be personally invited. So that would be something. I guess in my opinion, if someone's hunting your land, unfortunately these days, maybe get a document saying you asked to come out here, yeah, I don't really want that to go that route, because it's nice to have this land open for hunting and not make it so difficult, but it's unfortunate the suing society is killing that.
Does that exclude family members? I mean,
Anybody can sue for anything today, so remember that. But then I also remember when I was going through changes of my health insurance, I'm like, should I go this route or this route? And the lady was saying, you can insure yourself and you still won't cover every detail. You know, there's a point where you just gotta trust that it will work out, and hopefully those people that are out there in good faith won't do that. That's why insurance is great. At the same time, it's kind of a pain in the butt. There's a lot of money going out the door,
I
but
think the county would benefit from having an understanding of relative risk.
yeah, and that's why I think the berry picking law, the recreational use law is that if a tree falls on you, you can't get sued for that. That's just nature, so they could sue you, but going to court, does that mean they're gonna win? No. So, and I think they have this all written in the laws to protect people like that. So,
I think it would just be interesting, statistically, how many people are injured during the deer hunting? Because that gives you a relative risk value that may
yeah,
show. If it's 1 in 100, that's a lot different than 1 in 10,000.
I think each
You know.
gun season, it's probably 3 to 4 people are injured a year in the whole state practically. Now, falling, that's like hurt by a gun that I hear about. Falling from a tree stand is another story, things like that.
I've seen that quite commonly working in healthcare,
Yes.
not in this county, but generally, and I think those are, again, assessing risk is something that the owner has to do.
That covers what we were just talking about. Sorry, about that. I'm really trying.
Yeah, it's particular, and I'm afraid to ask it. In the Blue Hills, we got folks want to come out and climb the rocks. We got the only access to it. Somebody gets hurt on county land, am I liable because I took them up there?
If it's on county land?
Yeah.
No.
The rocks are on.
You know, they're cropping and Doyle.
Right.
Blue Hills fells.
If they're paying you to take you, so if you're just going out there.
yeah. Sure.
No, I don't think so.
Even though I took a group of to them. Across your property. Yeah.
Across your property? But it's not on your property?
Correct.
I would think not. I would say it would be up to the county to handle it. But I don't know. But the county, they have a lot of protection out there already saying it's at your own risk out there. So,
I won't hold you to it, but I'm
but I'm
curious.
thinking, that would be a question is these days, people can sue for anything. I'll say that again. It's unfortunate. I don't have that specific answer. But I am handing out some information you can read about. Gives you kind of more details a little bit and some examples that I found on the internet. And then I was actually sent the Wisconsin recreational use statute. I thought that was a really good document. It's a little older, but I think it holds up true to today. So these are 2 good documents you could read through on your own. That kind of explains it a little bit more detail. Yeah, I kind of just covered the surface a little bit. Any more questions? I'm sorry. I wish I could answer these but I'm not a lawyer. And I even talked to the lawyer upstairs and he goes, yeah, this is this case, but then if you look at this case, this happened, and then if you look at, and he told me to read the statutes, and I started reading them, and I'll tell you, whoo. My eyes glazed over, so it can get complicated, and that's why I think these handouts, and the reason I wanted this presentation for landowners is that it gives you some things to think about. And if you do have a lawyer in mind, or if you have people coming to your property to recreate, maybe you wanna have that question and say, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? Then again, something could happen in your house, and somebody could slip on your steps. It could be anything these days. But don't worry about it. My opinion is you can't worry. You just be a little cautious. Okay, we can do one. Okay, now we're gonna talk about fences. When is a fence required? Who pays? What is a legal fence? I actually have a handle on that too. And my opinion is, again, get along with your neighbors. So when you put a fence in, and it's required when you have, I don't know if that's on my next slide or not. It is required when you are grazing or farming your land. Unless the other parties are okay with it. So if you have cattle and you want to keep them in, you need to fence it. But the caveat that I actually learned, and I didn't know this until I started preparing for this, the other owner is required to pay for half the cost. So your neighbor should be paying half the cost of the fence to get it established. Yes, that is a fence law. And there's actually, let's say you put it in and the neighbor doesn't want to pay for half the cost. Or some other issues, or cattle get out and you put the fence up and you fix it and they refuse to pay for it. The fixing you just did on their fence to keep their cattle in. You can go, there's called a fence reviewer, and you go to I didn't write it down. It's the we can click to the next side. You go to the township president, essentially, and they have the authority to be the fence viewers, and they will go out there and document that it was fixed, and you can show them the paperwork and how much it costs. And then if the neighbor still refuses to pay, what that fence viewer does is they take a lien off their land, so they cannot sell their land if they refuse to pay, and they'll put it part of the taxes. So they'll get their money. It just may take a while. It doesn't happen very often. I went upstairs to ask, and it still is there, and it's still in the books. It doesn't happen very often, but be aware that because of COVID, there was a lot of people from the cities that moved over here. A lot of people that are not aware of how living in the country is like. That might cause some issues with fencing. So that's.
It sounds like you're describing, putting in a brand new fence where there never was one.
Yep, or
Okay.
you wanna put the new fence up where there was one.
Okay, and isn't there, some kind of is it a gentleman's agreement or a rule where you've got to stretch a fence, like you're gonna take care of this 40 and your neighbor's gonna take care of that 40? And if your 40 needs repair, you're responsible for that. If his 40 needs repair, he's responsible for that. You know, and I'm talking fences that have been there for decades. So that the fence has already been established, it's just that user agreement over which section you're each gonna take care of. So if my cattle went through his fence, he's gotta take care of that fence, he's gotta fix it, he's gotta make sure.
By law, it's both of you. But if
Any
you,
piece of fence.
that borders up to any neighbor, half and half, no matter what. If you have this agreement, that's what we recommend, work with your neighbors, like I said, with all the other conflicts, it's a really good idea to get along with your neighbors. And try to come up with, if it's your cattle and he has no cattle. I'm not saying you have to do it, but really, you really wanna create a fight to make him pay for the other half. It's up to you, you can legally do it. But I can tell you, I have heard horror stories, I've hiked landowners, I've heard the stories. When they get in a bad relationship with their neighbors, it's no fun owning that land anymore. And it's really good, sometimes you can't avoid it, I know that, but maybe pick your battles. But by technical law, that both parties has to pay for half. According to the fence law.
The handout says that if you stand facing your neighbor in the middle, each is generally responsible, it's not definitive, but generally you're responsible for the right.
Right,
Look to the right.
right. Or if you stand in a corner, fence is the same thing. You're
Okay,
responsible for the.
I think that's a default. If you, like, some people just have arrangements where they say, okay, you can take care of the fence and tell me what the cost is and I'll pay the money to do it. But if you can't make that kind of agreement, then the default is you pay for the right
Right.
side, as you face the fence, you pay for that side.
which is half and half.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, I think it is, but you stand on your land and he stands on his, you always get the right.
Yeah.
So everybody gets the right.
Okay,
But there has to be a purpose, isn't there? You can't, or can I just do this, oh, I want to put fence up? Or do you have to have a purpose? You know what I'm saying?
that is a good question.
Yeah, and your last slide showed that.
Yeah, you have to have it for farming, so if you have farming, which is crop, row crops,
Okay.
or cows. Or any type of animal you wanna graze.
There has to be a reason.
That's, yeah, you can't just say, I'm
Instead,
gonna
I
put
just
that
want
up.
to fence my neighbor.
And then you can pay for half of it.
Yeah. I did get a question in regards to, boundary trees. If a tree falls on the same property, who owns that tree? Actually, it's both parties. So it's called common law. And I looked this up, and you both have to agree to cut it down. And if you can't agree, then you'll be going to a lawyer. So if you wanna put a fence and it falls right into that middle of that tree and you can't agree. That's the other issue, then it's a lawyer again.
We just figured that the tree fell on your fence. You cut it off right by the fence. And that fence is yours. Not the neighbor ain't responsible for it. It's,
Yeah, when it falls, that's another story too, and where it falls. Exactly, and that I didn't look up. But if I remember, I do remember reading a little bit about that, where it falls can determine who gets that tree and stuff, and you cut up to the property line, if you know exactly where that property line is. Like I said, though, work with your neighbor, give half and half, they want the firewood, I mean, it really,
when you work with fences. It's entirely different neighbor than you do.
yeah. Right. So. This is all new, I learned this one preparing for this presentation, I did not know all these rules with fences. It's not very common these days, but I think it's gonna get, more people are raising their own cows, their chickens and everything these days, that it might become more of a prevalent issue that we're gonna get more questions on.
Is that only for property line fences?
Yeah, to
I'm
prevent
just
the,
saying hypothetical, you wanna graze cattle and somebody puts their fence 10 feet inside the property. Then it's all their cost.
then it's all their cost,
It's not,
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
This is
or
not a
2 feet
problem.
inside the
Yeah,
property.
but be aware when you put, like, and the other thing too is when, the DNR made this mistake many years ago, when we'd set up sales, the foresters. Back when, we didn't have the easy access to surveyors, we didn't have all this fancy equipment. So what the foresters used to do is they would just go 10 feet in and just mark up to that point. That was a big mistake, because the new neighbors figured, well, that's the property line. And then so I do not recommend ever doing that. Get as close as you can to the property line when you do a harvest. So that brings up that point. So yeah, I think so if the fence is on your property and it's nowhere close to their property line, then yes, that's all your cost.
I just thought of one, what if you got property and you have a road? And you got a fence, cause you got cattle or something in there, and then basically the power company has the. I don't know how that works, but the easement, you know, for so many feet, so do they have to share the cost of the fence with you?
I don't think so because they own the easements. They don't own the I
But-
don't,
You own the property on this side and they own the property on that side, and put a fence down the middle. And
that is a question I do
and
not
there's
know.
one person has cattle and the other doesn't.
I would
So,
guess that if you're trying to keep them out of their property and it's actually,
No, I try to keep them off the road if you had cattle,
Right.
you know, and you want to put it along.
so you want the township or possibly the county to pay for
That's just the
the.
question, I just thought of that one.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, that would be the same argument if you have a property, county property and you put a fence on that line, does the county pay for half of it?
That's true too.
Not anymore, they don't.
See, and I think there's exceptions, probably, I'm guessing, is they make exceptions for government property.
Yeah.
Just like adverse possession, you can't adverse possess government property, any public property anymore. So I'm guessing that's probably the case, I don't know. But if you really wanna know when that comes up, then let me know, I'll find out. I'll just go upstairs and ask the county lawyer. Cause I could ask, if you guys are really interested in that, I could go ask the county lawyer and get that answer to you. If you wanna write that question down, and I can, okay, perfect. That's a good question, it'd be nice to know. Cause I know some of you guys own land next to the public property. The positive thing though is I don't know how they'll do that because the positive thing is next to, at least in Barron County Forest, we have a county surveyor. And you get that surveyed for free. So, I mean, you know where your property line is exactly. This pretty much goes into what I already said. Go to the town clerk, there's free writing, like I said, anything in writing is the best. Okay, so timber taxes. This is another thing that I glaze over, I have a hard time, it's, handout G and H, I have. I did call. So here's timber tax each year, there's some information on. Taxes you might wanna be concerned with, like farm share payments. You will be filling out a 1099. Even though you're getting money to do this cost share through either DNR or a federal program, you still pay taxes on the money you get. Timber harvest income, and I'll go into a little bit of this.
I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about?
You're harvesting.
If you do.
Oh, if I'm harvesting on my own land?
Yes, you have to pay, like, if you make money off the timber harvest,
Right.
you have to report that.
I thought you were talking something about the county and this and that.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Okay,
No, so we're talking about taxes and, why it's of land and timber acquisition, I'll get into that with the next slide. So classification, there's different classifications and three main ones: business, investor, and personal use. I'm guessing most of you are personal use. You don't have it under a business, or investor. So unfortunately, being personal use, your taxes, let's say you have a timber harvest, this is based on making money off of your property. If you have a timber harvest, there really are no deductions you can do. You just gotta pay an income tax on that. But businesses and investors, there's ways you can deduct. I actually watched a really good YouTube video from a Learn About Your Land from 2008. They had Gary Searfoss. He used to be a forest tax guy. Actually, I talked to him on the phone before this program a few weeks ago, just to get some ideas. And pretty much what I'm telling you right now is what he kind of told me to tell you. But if you want more details, go into YouTube and you type in learn about your land and then write down tax issues for woodland owners. Now it's,
We'll share that link.
okay, it's a really good YouTube video. It's really well done. He explains it all. And he tells you the different forms and taxes and stuff like that to fill out and what are the pros and cons. Now realize that was in 2000, I think it was 2008 when he did that video. Things have changed, but I don't think they've changed that drastically that you couldn't use that information. I think it's a good video and I think it covers everything with taxes. Something to point out in that video, he mentions business. If you want to make your land a business, you have to prove yourself that it's a business. Because if you own land, you don't make money constantly every year. You make a timber harvest and then it's another 10 years and then you do another timber harvest. So you've got to have documentation and that it's all business, that you're not recreating. And you got to prove that to the IRS. So be aware of that. I don't know many people that have that business in their land. Anybody here? It's mostly personal use, hobby. Now farming, that's a good question. I don't know that one. If you specifically graze your woods, you're already getting that tax break, and then if you harvest, maybe that's why farmers don't harvest any money. They don't want that income. I don't know. That is a good question. Can you write that question down about farmers?
Yeah.
I never even thought of that. Because that is a very good question. That's a business. But you would have to prove that you're only using that land as a business.
So like a
So-
Christmas tree farm, or is that what you're getting at? Or
Christmas
you-
tree
you
farm,
grow
I would say-
pulpwood or something, or?
That would be, because so a business versus an investor, a business would be you continually get something from it. So that would be a Christmas tree farm, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But a farmer, if you're only having that woods and you're not using it as part of your business, I wouldn't think you could. That's my guess from what I've read over the last few weeks. Because unless you're specifically putting your cattle in there, then maybe you could. But I don't, if you're not, and you have it fenced off and you hunt in there and you don't use it any part of your agricultural business, then I don't know if that would be considered.
Kind of the same question, if you kept bees, would there be a certain amount of space around the apiaries or something you could claim maybe, or?
What was that?
If you kept bees, beekeeping?
That I don't know either. I know, so that goes into asking the question, maybe bringing your taxes down. So I get that question with a business tapping your trees for maple syrup. Instead of putting it into the managed forest law, you could tap your trees and consider that a business, and that will bring your use of the land down in taxes as agriculture. But you have to call your assessor and ask, how many taps do you need per acre? Which is quite a bit. To make it an agricultural use. That is another good question. That brings up some other things. You can go to the next one. Like I was telling you, the timber harvest income, there are gonna be, you're gonna get taxed on it. I suggest talking to your accountant. They probably can help you a lot better than I can, but at least bring this up, and that YouTube video does bring up. I was thinking I'd write all these notes down and re-explain it to you, but I think it's best for you just to watch that YouTube video. And he explains it really well. And you can pause it and fast forward, it's really great. I had a timber harvest and I just had my tax accountant take care of it. He did it all for me, and I do know landowners get worried, especially when they're retiring, they gotta watch how much money they make. So one way I've known a lot of landowners, they'll do half the harvest one year and then do the other half the next year. So you can play that game with the logger. So that's something to think about. And then you can deduct some of the costs. You know, the consulting forester, to hire somebody, directly related to the sale. So you can deduct some costs that are directly related. So if you have a forester come out there and mark trees for you and you pay for that service, then that could be part of it. So you want, my recommendation, if you have a timber harvest, keep documentations of everything. I think that's the key for everything, have a file. Paper's awesome. Okay, so, and then I mentioned forestry assistance programs, cost share programs. Even though you get, it's, you know, you kind of think of it as free money, as long as I do this project, but it really isn't, you still have to do a 1099. So you'll get a tax form in the mail that you got this money from the government. So there's no such thing as free money. But you know, the other thing is with tree planting. Let's go into casualty loss, the next one. Yeah, go to the next one. So this is another one that I struggle with because as you can imagine here in this county, we had 2 big tornadoes in 2017 and then another big windstorm in 2019. I get this question a lot. One thing that I noticed in 2019, landowners were calling me a lot, and they actually had the loggers come up with an estimate of how much their timber loss was. And they submitted that to the tax accountant. And so it shows that they had a loss based on what they were supposed to make versus what they did make. And I don't know how that affected taxes, but I'm assuming it helped them.
Would you have had to have had a contract signed prior to that?
No, the logger actually did it for them. We went out there and says, you would have made X amount of money, but because of the sale, I'm only paying you this much money. Yeah, that's what they did in 2019. A lot of landowners said the loggers were doing it for them. I don't know if it worked because they never called me back. Another way to secure yourself is to get a management plan with all the details of when you bought the property and the value of your timber. So that if you have a storm in the next few years, you can deduct what it cost you to buy that property and the value of that timber that you bought it at that time. And then when you have the timber sale, that's another way of doing it. Most people don't have that. And the other issue is that if the longer you own the land, that initial investment won't be the same. Because in that YouTube video, Gary Searfoss brings that up, is that when you buy that property, let's say you bought 40 acres in 1980, that was pure aspen. Back then, aspen was worth nothing. Today, it's worth a lot. So it's like comparing apples with oranges. So the longer you own your land, that management plan and all that details don't work. But let's say you plant trees out on your property. Keep all that details of how much money you spent, how many trees you planted, so that if, let's say, a fire comes through and wipes out your trees, or a tornado wipes out your trees, you can use that as documentation, the investment you put into that. So, and it doesn't cover, you know, insects, diseases. So the emerald ash borer, if you have a pure ash stand, that's not gonna be covered. Droughts. Theft, timber theft. You can get that back. It's a lot of work to do, but it's worth it. If it's a lot of timber, or if somebody just comes over, let's say hypothetically, a logger's cutting and you go out there, you're walking your property lines and this logger cut a few trees, kind of zigzagged and didn't realize he did it. And it was an honest mistake. Talk to the logger and try to get the fair market value if it was an honest mistake, or a little bit more. My recommendation, because I've had landowners upon landowners that go to court over a few trees and they spend more money on the lawyers than those trees are worth. So if you can come up with an agreement. I did have one landowner when I was in Polk County, he clear cut 5 acres of somebody else's property. It was very obvious with that. Thankfully that person was in the managed forest law, so he got my free service. I went out there and measured every stump and estimated how long that tree was. So I came up with the exact volume that he cut off on that 5 acres. It took me a long time, I can tell you. And, he got that free service, but the problem was, is that landowner was in the managed forest law, and back then you had to pay a severance tax. So even though they stole the timber, he still had to pay the severance tax. So he got my free service to figure out how much severance tax he had to pay, but that helped him in court to fight to get his money. And he got double stumpage. So twice the value of each tree.
I thought it was triple damage.
He got double, but I don't know. I thought it was always double.
Did you include a reference to that YouTube video?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much the end. Yep.
You were talking about kind of calculating mature trees in your calculation. My parents had somebody come through and kind of clear a path through their property and ripped out probably like dozens and dozens of like smaller trees. Is that worth less than because they're younger trees, or can you kind of calculate that would have been worth more in the future? Timber.
You can hire a consulting forester to come up with a calculation for that for you.
Mhm.
But like I said, I would try to work with your neighbor to say, hey, these trees took X amount of time to grow. This was gonna be my future forest.
Mhm.
Can you maybe supplement? An
This
example.
person was trying to do the adverse possession thing, I think.
Yeah.
They actually went through our property along Rice Lake on the back side of it and did this. They planted grass and everything. I mean, it's like,
Well, then, if you can probably get them
kidding
to
me right now?
buy some trees for you and plant some white pine or something out there. Say, hey, this is our property.
Mhm.
You took our trees,
So
and
we
maybe
just
get
had
them
an
to buy some
attorney
trees.
give notice. That they were trespassing and they're not, so we
Yeah,
left it at that, just.
I had example, we planted a windbreak. And it, and I measured, the right of way, I was way off the right of way. The township mowed 200 feet onto my property and mowed all my trees down.
Oh my.
Thankfully, I know that the trees will come back. I did not charge the township, but I said, if you ever do this again, I want my trees replaced. They are growing fine. They'd be twice as tall now, because trees do come back. But the thing is that happens, and I put a metal post now, so it doesn't happen ever again. They were really attractive. I couldn't believe they moved 200 feet. But, so there's things to do, and I like the township. You don't want to get in bad relationships with them. Just make them aware not to ever do that again.
Yeah.
So. I still run out there. Wait, you're only supposed to mow to here, because I have new trees growing naturally, so they want to mow everything. I get it. They want to maintain the roads. But I guess the key thing, and of all my experience in the 20+ years I've been working with the DNR, and I've seen a lot of lawsuits, I've seen a lot of issues with landowners. Just even a couple of years ago, I've seen 2 different landowners, and I actually hiked one with one landowner, and 2 months later, I hiked a different one, and I didn't even know it was his land, because I was on the other side, and he owned like 300 acres, and we ended up walking up over here, and he goes, oh, I gotta tell you the story about our adverse possession he was trying to get, and he told me this whole story. They all hate each other. He says he hates hunting back there now. So, I mean, it's just almost not even worth it. And you can't even enjoy your property, and you have this fear. So his case, I got both stories, but it's one of those things is I think if you can get a way to work with your neighbor, it's the best. Or just say, let it go. Neighbor, but, yep.
So, sometimes you'll get a forester on your property to mark timber and mark where the property lines are, but those markings that the forester might do where the property line isn't necessarily legal. Would you recommend getting a surveyor if you're gonna get a?
Well, that's why I handed out at the beginning the cutting line agreement.
Okay.
And you can use that. Like the forester might have equipment. I know there's some there are consulting for, that's a very good question. There are some consulting foresters that do have a Trimble, which is a very fancy GPS that can get really close to the property line. If there is none, or they can find the boundaries and do their best they can. But I still, even with those equipment, if it's not a survey, an official survey, use that cutting line agreement. And let's say you get the neighbor to come out there and they say, yeah, I think it should be I think it should go through this tree, not that tree. I would just give it, as long as it's within a couple feet.
Who owns that tree?
That's why I said, if it's on the property line, it's common property, so both of you own it.
Okay. County's on one side, I'm on the other. They mark this tree on this side for their property boundary and harvested everything that way. I'm having clear cut on this side, it's the same tree marked. Who owns that tree?
The county and you.
Whoever gets.
So
there
leave it.
first to the fence.
If you want it cut for some reason, call the county up and say, I really want that tree down because I'm doing a clear cut and I think it's gonna hurt my clear cut. Give that justification and they can probably sell you the tree.
I don't want it.
But. Or, come up with, they'll say just cut it. I don't know. You'd have to call the county and see what they have to say.
Does the county have, recommended foresters?
I have a list of consulting foresters. I didn't bring that with me, but if you want that, I can send that. I have a list. It's on the website. You can look them up. I created a list, so it's all on one sheet of paper because the DNR website is a pain in the butt, in my opinion. When you go to that site, find a forester, there's no good printable way to print that. So what I did is I created my own form. It's all on one sheet and it has all the consulting foresters on the top, all the industrial foresters on the bottom. And if you want a certified plan writer to write your management plan to go into the managed forest law, I even coded them on that sheet.
And we could call you for your preferred list?
Yes, that's my list. And I can't recommend anybody on that list. Just everybody in the area. My recommendation, I can recommend, if you go into the managed forest law, and if you want to get a plan written, hire the cheapest one. They all have to do the same thing. Unless you want them to set up your timber harvest and you're gonna be working with them along the way, and the cheaper ones, look at where they live. The closer to your property, the cheaper they are, because they don't have to travel as far. That's my experience. I don't work with the managed forest law anymore, but that's what when I used to, that's what I used to recommend. Yep.
I want to get back to that. You let somebody hunt on your land. They ask if they can hunt there. Okay. But what if you just say then no? Because you're worried about some liability, might happen. And then they come and they do have an accident. The person who owns the land is not responsible.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
it's
true.
their problem. They
Right.
trespassed then and they got in trouble and
Another
that's their
option.
fault.
Yeah, another option saying, I'm nervous if you come here because if you get hurt, I might be liable because I invited you here. And I'm nervous about that.
Yeah.
Say, you find a lawyer, get a written document that's proved by your lawyer and you pay for all of it and bring it to me and I'll look it over or talk to somebody to look at it and have them do all the paperwork for you and you can have an agreement that way. And maybe that would cover you. That might be an option. Make them do the legwork. That's another option. I'm just guessing that.
Yeah.
Is an option if you want.
But the thing is, I think if I tell them no, and they decide, well, I'm going in there anyway. Like a lot of
Yeah, and then
people do.
if they get hurt, then it's.
And if they get hurt, that's their problem. It's not my problem, not the landowner's problem.
Right.
But that might be a thing where you document too, because if they get hurt. And then, if they were to say, yeah, but I asked you and you said I could.
Yeah.
That would get down into court where hearsay. I say this, they say that. And
Unless you have it recorded.
I think
Right.
she would be in the right because it's her property.
Right.
So. But yeah, anything can happen these days, it seems like. There's a lot of what ifs, yeah.
Can I ask you something from last week?
Yeah.
I went on a DNR site and I looked at, you were talking invasive species. And I noticed they must have had over a dozen pictures. And some of them were flagged as prohibited. What does that mean?
So I don't remember what year, it was 2008, that throws, the DNR created a law. Because not too long ago, you could go to Walmart and, Rice Lake and buy buckthorn. I remember seeing that, so it is, DNR created a law so that, you couldn't sell those species. So prohibited means you no longer can sell. You can have them on your property, but you can't sell them.
Oh,
Okay, you can't give them away. Restrictive, I would have to look that up. There's another word, and restrictive, I would have to look up the website exactly what that means, and if I remember right, that means. I don't know.
It's certain, I think it's certain parts of the state. It's prohibited in certain parts and not in others, so it's restricted by a geographic boundary
But
of
it
where it's
doesn't mean
allowed.
that that you're prohibited from having it on your property. Oh, okay.
It's about purchasing, planting.
Oh,
So when they created that law, they had, you know, the DNR didn't want people to lose money in their businesses, so they had a certain amount of time to sell that stock. And then after that, they're not allowed to sell it anymore, and they became prohibited. So and I think maybe restrictive means that you can't even give somebody that plant off your property. So,
but there's no requirement that you have to get rid of that on your property. Okay.
No.
All right.
If you have a hazard on your land, I mean, it can be, you know, an old pond or something,
like an abandoned building,
yeah,
then
okay,
you need to make people aware of it.
okay, if you make them aware of it, and you've got people, I'll pick on the people that are moving out to the country and are pretty green as far as their knowledge, and they say, oh, that looks like fun, let's go in there and see what's going on. And they falls down on top of them, whatever, would you then be responsible because you had a hazard? They're trespassing.
If they're trespassing, no.
Yeah,
And you could maybe put a sign up and say danger, if that would, because it's an abandoned building or something like that. And if they're trespassing, no, then it's not your,
But if they come.
But they can still
if
sue
they
you,
have
but they-
permission to hunt.
if they have permission to hunt, then I would get it in writing, saying that here are the known hazards that I know out there. And it has to be, you know, human-made hazard, essentially. What I'm saying is you dig a hole and you purposely cover it up so someone can fall into it, or, you know, an abandoned building, you know that. A pond, that is a common knowledge part of natural resources. I mean, that's same thing with a tree falling or
Well, that's,
with the
I'm
wind.
thinking, you know, somebody that doesn't know.
That is,
Familiar, and they put a tree stand on a tree that has no business.
right, shouldn't be on a tree, then that's not, you're not liable.
And then the trespass laws, and I know you touched on the dogs, but if the dog goes onto the land, or you shoot a deer and the deer goes onto the land,
You can't go on their property. to
you
get
can't
the
go on
deer.
their property without permission.
Right.
That's the oldest trick in the book.
Yeah, it's,
It is,
yeah,
it
I
is.
know.
Oh, well, we shot one and everything.
I do
And it's like,
recommend-
oh, really? Can I see the tracks where it went
Well,
on?
there are
Because
people,
I need to see that, and then maybe you can go after it, you know, they never have tracks.
there's some, you know, there's the leader gets.
Yeah, there's some
I've
people
met
that
some
do shoot
people
deer and
stop people
ask
and they-
permission, and I recommend allowing it if they have good reason to have a deer out there.
They call them afterwards, see how many were on their land.
So it is their land.
It's their land, and then some people have shot deer and, after the season, you go out again and you find how many dead deer there are. Yeah, it's a, really. But no, it's just one, and you'd have to get the permission from them to go in and,
Yeah.
which is what I thought, but just wanted to sure.
Yeah, and if you're concerned, I've had people say, well, yeah, you can. I'm gonna have my husband and I go out there and we'll walk with you out there. You know, I'll help you drag it out. Yeah, help, you know, help
Yeah,
the
that's a good
neighbor,
way to
at the
do it.
same time, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing out there.
That, learn about your land on YouTube, what was the rest of that?
I'll send that link to you, but it's,
Did you get an email last week?
Yeah,
Or, so what they're gonna do is the same thing, they're gonna send you an email with all, I think, all the copies of these documents that you got on paper. Plus, they'll have in there, maybe those questions that we couldn't answer, and that YouTube link,
oh, okay.
so.
What's next week's class?
Different programs available for landowners.
are there any other questions for Jen?
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, and then, yeah, nothing. And if you didn't have to spend it, it'd be okay. I didn't know when I signed up.